Hi everyone. This is my final presentation on the brain-computer interfaces and some of the emerging risks that we're looking to in the near and further along future. So a quick agenda on what I wanted to go through during the presentation. So I had a little background information related to it, a little more in depth than the outline that I went through in the beginning. Current state, since there was some movement in this area since I did the outline and there was some updated news. Some of the emerging risks, which will be the bulk, and then one slide on looking forward into maybe some future use cases of the technology. So this was a brief timeline I put together just to show the speed of how rapidly things have been evolving in this space. So in 2019, Elon Musk hired a practicing neurosurgeon to participate in this new project and development of the brain-computer interface. 2020, they developed the patented surgical robot. And then 21 through 2023, there was some more traction related to and developing the technology and going through FDA approval. And then they started recruiting patients in 2023 for clinical trials, and most of them were quadriplegics who had issues with the spine and could use the brain computer interface to help them kind of with their daily life. 2024 was the first human implant, and that happened on January 29th, 2024. Some background on the Food and Drug Administration approval process, just to set the playing field for what they had to go through. So the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health is responsible for regulating these firms in general that manufacture, repackage, relabel, or import medical devices sold in the United States. And then Class 3 medical devices are ones that don't have a lot of research behind them and do require a lot of clinical trials, assurance and safeties, additional information in order to be passed and approved. For these devices, there's a pre-market approval process. Application is scientific regulatory documentation to the FDA to demonstrate the safety and effectiveness of this type of device, since there isn't a lot of data on it historically. So since these are the first of their kind, there's a lot of testing that goes into it and a lot of approval before it could actually go to the market. They are still in some sort of clinical trial phase where they've recruited some of the patients, but probably going to be quite some time in data gathering stage before it could be anything very marketable to the general population. And then within the pre-market approval process, there's two sections kind of. So clinical laboratory studies and non-clinical. The non-clinical is information about the microbiology, toxology, etc. That can include animal tests or other things that are done in the laboratory. And then clinical tests investigate the protocol, safety, and effectiveness of the data, adverse reactions, failures, replacements, patient information. So mostly done in a live patient, which is kind of the stage that they're in now. So this is a picture actually of the surgical robot that they did patent and does do the threading between the chip and the implant and then the brain tissue. And I just wanted to add a little more specifics about the company as a whole, because I feel like some of the companies are going in a similar direction. But Neuralink's mission statement I put here: create a generalized brain interface to restore autonomy to those with unmet medical needs today and unlock human potential tomorrow. So as you can see here with that, the short term seems to be more medical and helping people with some sort of disability, whether it's hearing, seeing, or quadriplegia. They have some limbs that are missing, but it leaves the door open for unlocking of the human potential tomorrow, which I thought was interesting, just to highlight how it may go to different areas, right? Where it's like if it's embedded into work, if it's embedded more into mass culture, where people are getting these things more to just augment themselves and not necessarily because they require them. And then most companies have, I would say, these three products that they are patenting or working on. So for Neuralink specifically, the chip that is created that goes into your brain, the software around it, and then the robot are the three things that did require FDA approval. and are patented by them. In the news so far this year, so as I mentioned before, as of January 30th is when a Wall Street Journal article came out, but on the 29th they implanted the first Neuralink device into a human named Noland Arbaugh. And on March 20th, there was another article, which I have linked in the appendix if anyone wants to read either of these two, of him playing chess and speaking about his experience of getting the chip implanted in him, which I thought was interesting how he could do, and it was mentioned kind of in the article, how he can do two different things at one time. So even though his brain is talking about the process, he's still focusing on moving the cursor and playing chess, and that's kind of what's registering in the device. So even with some waves that may be doing different things, the device was able to pick up kind of his intent for what the cursor was supposed to be doing and relay that to the machine. So into some of the emerging risks, I would say a lot of them actually, almost all risks related to current cybersecurity, I would say apply. Yeah. So the first section I have here is around data security and privacy. So since the device is in a human, getting that data to the destination or wherever it's being relayed to is obviously going to be in transit, and storing that data, since it is very sensitive brainwave data, can tell people's intent, thoughts, many other things about them. So maybe their biology and other biometric type data should be encrypted at rest as well by the organization, and make sure this isn't something that people can get their hands on. So encryption techniques to protect the communication between the sensors. And in one of the researches I saw, it was said it was arguably one of the weakest points of PCI systems right now, which I thought was interesting. Data privacy, so adherence to a lot of the data privacy laws in the United States and in the world. As we know, kind of in our line of business, there's a lot of regulation that's come out, whether it's GDPR or the California Consumer Privacy Act, or other ones that are coming out through different states. There is going to have to be adherence to this, whether it's from a personal identifiable information lens or through HIPAA. So in some of the research I did, I noted that there was a race kind of right now, after California did it a while ago, to enact some of these consumer privacy laws across many state lines. There isn't one federally yet, so which in the absence of the comprehensive federal law would provide other consumers with the choice on how we can use their data. Currently there are 15 states that have comprehensive data privacy laws, California being one, Virginia, Connecticut, Colorado, Utah, Iowa, etc. The link to the article actually has all of them as well for anyone interested, and I can post that with the slides. And then there are general laws as well, where some other states have introduced narrow bills for privacy, so not fully comprehensive, but to protect data, including biometric identifiers, health data, governing the activities of specific entities like brokers, internet services, or breaches. So there are many states that this would have to apply to in the U.S., let alone internationally. Compliance with HIPAA would be a big thing as well. So all of the assurances that come with the HIPAA Act and then the High-Tech Act under it to secure this data and maybe not be able to transmit it to others would apply here. Ethical use of the data, I thought, was another interesting one around kind of like the privacy. So considerations for sharing the neural data for research and or collaborative purposes. And then I would say even the company themselves using it for kind of like good, instead of trying to manipulate, understand the people's thoughts and kind of manipulate actions. Such as I would argue some social media companies where They try and get you onto some of these platforms because of all the data that they have. They're able to see what you like, what you'll keep watching, how to get you on the app and keep you on the app. So I think that's a big area as well that companies will have to navigate. Um, there's a lot of rules and regulations related to the sharing of health data, so that may be a little bit harder to get around. But just ensuring that it's getting into the right people's hands for these collaborative purposes, and not just selling data to sell data to make money, in this instance, would be another risk, and something that many organizations would have to think about as they're going through this. Some other general cyber risks: hacking of the brain-computer interfaces. So previously, before the actual invasive implementations, and I think even with some of the invasive implantations, the waves that were studied were P300 waves, which I did read some very in-depth article about it. It's somewhat complicated to understand, but it does relay the intent kind of like of the person, and however the wave comes off someone's brain, that's how the sensor would pick it up and read that data. And that was used more in non-invasive types. So it says here, kind of like the overarching definition, the wave is measured to brain response as a direct result to a specific sensory, cognitive, or motor event. So that's how they were detecting brainwaves before. And then a lot of the technology now that is on the brain or invasive can read all the different types of brainwaves that we have, delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. So those all do perform different functions within the brain. I don't want to necessarily go into it, but any interception of this data, or being able to hack this data, send fake delta, theta, alpha waves, whichever waves maybe can control your thoughts or control your motor functions, that would be, of course, a huge risk if that's able to be replicated through some sort of virus and maybe even sent to someone's device. Malware and viruses, kind of similar. So I would say even it's almost like the first worm that was ever created, the Morris worm, where you might be getting into territory that you don't even know what's possible to, at this point, kind of like hack one of these devices and be able to do to them. Whether it's something similar, it's like enumerating who has these devices, being able to short circuit them or make them not work, make them work in a different way, maybe have up some sort of botnet with them to make people perform things all at the same time. Who knows? Maybe a huge unknown right now. And then just some of the data corruption and manipulation, kind of like I was mentioning before, messing with some of the brain waves or the electroencephalogram EEG data. Device hijacking, denial of service attacks could be one of the things here. Propagation of the virus or the worm. Neural data interception, either through weak encryption or access to the device, and maybe a lot more. I think in this area too, there's probably some known unknowns that they're going through, such as these types of things, the corruption, the hijacking, the denial of service. These are known kind of cyber attacks that occur already, but we don't necessarily know how they would work in this environment of brain-computer interfaces. And then there's the unknowns where you know, tons of ramifications that you can't even comprehend right now. Attacks that evolve over time with the technology, like that has over the past few years. I found an interesting article actually from the University of Essex or something in the UK about some of the cybersecurity risks and then countermeasures. The list was pretty big, but as you can see on the left, there's a lot of them that are ones that we know, right? Ones that are out there, but may not apply to all devices or all types of software. But in this case, since it's running hardware, software, physical security, there's almost all component of cybersecurity related to it. So almost all of these current attacks that are known are in play, right? Firmware of it, battery draining, some sort of injection malware, ransomware, holding the device hostage, spoofing, etc. And then there's a table that's larger than table 1 with some of the countermeasures. So I put a couple of them on the right just to take a look for the show, but the full listing is in the link and pages 6 to 8 as I noted on here. Physical security, I thought was another interesting one. As I've been going through my job in IT audit and then even in internal audit for some of these financial services organizations, it seems that physical security is something that's becoming relatively less of a risk, which I don't know, might be coming back. But for a lot of work that I used to do when I was doing consulting, physical security components of looking at the door where the servers are, all that was almost scoped out due to low risk, which I always thought was interesting because if someone gets access to that, they have access to a lot of things. But it's something that isn't really think about anymore, so I thought it was interesting to look at it from this perspective. Physical device degradation was one area I found interesting. So we haven't really had devices that we've had in the human body for, days, years, months. So seeing how they react to our biology by being in there, whether it's our immune system attacking them, trying to understand what they are, maybe even remove them because they're not part of the natural environment. Physically implanting them in the skull must not degrade through the condition. So it doesn't have oxygen. How is it supposed to cool itself? It's already in your skull. It's in there for a long amount of time. Might have to deal with, all the data at all times coming in, and still have to hold up against that, even if it's one of these first or older generations. And one of the interesting things I saw in the on the Neuralink website was they're performing testing in the preclinical research to do some of this, and they're doing it not necessarily in animals to reduce the amount of animals that they would have to do invasive procedures for and maybe potentially harm. So they built a lab area where they put these devices in there and they expedite the process to predict how the N1 implant will change in biological like conditions like they would be in your brain over time in the order of years without actually having to wait that long, by leaving it in the biology of some subject, such as the first person who has the implant, or a test subject, such as an animal, monkey, or whatever else they used. So they do this through elevating the temperature, reacting to the oxygen, etc. And they have this whole formula, which was on their website, which I thought was actually quite interesting and a good way to make it a little more sustainable, at least from a testing perspective. Making sure it's tamper resistant, so physical damage or destruction to the implant and any malicious hardware. So if this is something that you do require and you go snowboarding and hit your head, you have to make sure, even with a helmet on, that the physical damage may not destroy the implant and it can still work over time. And then biometric authentication, I thought, was another area that was actually quite interesting. So physically securing the device, to ensure that the biometric authentication does have integrity and is not compromised. So they've been studying how you can use your brainwave as a unique pattern, kind of like your facial recognition software or your fingerprint, to authenticate to certain devices, whether that's your computer or your phone in the future. So very sci-fi. Vulnerability and patch management, focusing on innovation and introduction of new features rather than proactively handling security. This is something that we discussed in class and I think is important. Kind of related to IoT devices in general, but to the software liability topic. So this is a very intricate device that is dealing with very delicate data. This may be one area where you want to introduce that. Making sure that secure coding is part of kind of the development and the build of this rather than an afterthought, and being the first to the market. And then prohibiting the use of open source. I thought this was interesting. It was just something I stumbled upon, but it goes back to even Log4j. So you don't really know, it's not your code, you don't know what the vulnerabilities are. You assume potentially that it's secure because there's so many eyes on it, but look what happens sometimes when you assume that. One of the potential largest vulnerabilities in history. Looking forward, I thought there were some interesting things. So once you get out of the medical trials, which are clearly important, and I think would be a huge help for a lot of people, whether it's helping people see, helping people hear, helping people move limbs that they may not have. Using them in jobs was one of the use cases that I kept stumbling upon. So whether it's heavy machinery, pilots, or doctors, to be able to measure maybe their stress levels or their fatigue, things that you clearly cannot measure without having something physically in your body, and then being able to say, like, they may not be fit to actually perform this flight as a pilot or perform this procedure as a doctor, and you have to get someone else in there. Potential to reach the mass market for commercial use. So, like I mentioned, a lot of FDA approval, a lot of things that even in some of the research I did, a lot of experts kind of don't think this will happen for at least a few years with all the clinical trials going on. And then integrations with other technologies such as augmented reality, virtual reality, and then artificial intelligence. This goes back to some of the other areas around even the cyber risks. I would say we don't even know what this may be like or what potential integration that these could have. Augmented reality, I feel you kind of picture, but with artificial intelligence and this, the possibilities seem almost endless. And then, yeah, so that's all I had for this. Let me know what you think. If you think there's any other future implementations, if you know anything about it or see anything about it in the future, I'd be curious to hear. And the rest is just the bibliography and the sources that I used. Thank you.